Thanks for that introduction, and hello, everybody. My name's Betty. I'm dialing in from Brooklyn, New York. I'm a grateful person in recovery, and I'm a divine spiritual being living a temporary human experience. I'm really grateful to be here. Just listening to somebody introduce me like in their own words, that was really cool. It was just like really nice to hear just from somebody like witnessing my story, how they can construct who I am. And it was really dead on. So yeah, I'll just give you like a brief overview about what I'm going to talk about. I had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening in March of 2019. I didn't have any language for it then. This is all language that I've accumulated since then. But my life transformed 180 degrees. It went from complete darkness to light. And I'm going to share about the journey of integrating.
Recording in progress.
In that process. So there's going to be a lot of trauma that I share and a lot of triumph. So buckle up. And I'll start with telling you like some of my origin story. So I grew up in a really chaotic, dysfunctional family. My whole family is a perpetual cycle of addiction, poverty, molestation, incest, rape. It's been that way for generations and generations. And it is exhausting being the one to break all the generational curses, but I guess that's what I'm doing. So like in my family, you're taught at a very early age how to use drugs to cope with your experience because everybody has a mirrored experience. So, my parents taught me how to use, their parents taught them how to use, and it's been that way forever and ever. And in 2007, my parents made a decision to stop using drugs. And they did that by committing suicide with one another. I was 23 when that happened. My sister was 18. We found them. And, this loss it just enveloped me in so much trauma. I can't really remember much of my life before that happened. And this experience, it like molded me to drugs in such an insane way. There were two voices in my head after this experience. One was, you should stop using drugs. Your parents just died from them. And then there was another voice that said, you have to keep using drugs. It's all that you have left of them. What kind of daughter would you be to let go of the legacy of your family? And that voice just seemed more familiar and it seemed to make more sense. And so drugs became my entire identity. I thought that I was some kind of party girl. I was a bartender. Like this was my lifestyle. And I thought that I was so much fun, and in reality, in hindsight, I can see now that, I was medicating this open, pussy, gaping wound inside of me of abandonment and rejection and fear and grief and loss. And, I was already an addict before my parents had died. I started drinking and smoking weed, and then that transformed into getting a prescription for pain pills when I got my wisdom teeth removed. And from there, it was just like, what can I get my hands on? This is what I want to experience. I want to not be in myself. I want to feel outside myself all the time. And so, after my parents died, I didn't know how to cope with my reality. I abandoned my sister. I didn't know how to take care of another human being. And I was so scared that she would leave. And so I abandoned her first. And it's been sort of like this cycle of us doing that back and forth to each other ever since then. And, I did a geographic. I moved across the country. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I moved across the country to New York, where my parents were from. And I thought that I was going to rediscover their love story by moving here. I wanted to know what kind of people they were before their addiction just completely consumed them. I know that couldn't have always been what their life was like. And I wanted to try to find out who they were when they first met, when they had me. And, I accomplished some of those goals by moving to New York and meeting their old friends and talking to some extended family. And drugs just became my best friend and my partner, even though I had this goal of sort of rediscovering my parents' timeline, drugs still, they were my best friend, the fact that I've stepped into this journey of spirituality and spiritual awareness it's bizarre to me because drugs were my God. Like drugs were my higher power. They were my whole universe. There was no space in my life to believe in anything else, because that's how consumed I was in my shadow, in my darkness, in my addiction. So yeah, I just continue to use drugs, and the dis-ease of addiction, it's progressive. So like I said, like it started out just like I was partying, like I thought that I was having a good time, and then I can't tell you what the moment was, but there was one moment when like it became a job instead of a party. Like this was my whole identity now. And like before my parents had died, I felt like a victim my whole life, like I was really in my victim mentality. Like the universe has it out for me. And, like all of these terrible things seem to keep happening to me. And why me, why me, why me? And when my parents passed away, I decided that I was no longer going to be the victim in life. I was going to be the perpetrator. I was going to be the abuser in people's storylines because I couldn't take being hurt anymore. So now I was going to be the person to hurt others. We have a saying in our collective: hurt people. And that was definitely what my life was. And I caused a lot of wreckage in my life. And so the progression of my disease, I really became like a dumpster for drugs. I experienced another very traumatic loss in my life. I had a boyfriend who needed a kidney. He was 35 years old. He was starting dialysis. He was on a donor list. And, I thought that we should be living our best life, because I didn't know how much life he had left. And to me, living your best life meant using drugs. And while my boyfriend needed a kidney, he died of a cocaine overdose. His heart exploded. And I don't even think that he really liked using drugs. I just think that he really liked me. And he was just doing what I wanted to. And so the guilt from that death, it took me to a place that I've never been before. And I pray that I never have to go back to, just like to the bowels of grief and loss and darkness. And I made a deal with myself that I would do this insane amount of drugs. And if I didn't die, I would go get help. And I woke up. I can't believe I woke up. And that's just like kind of like one more little moment where I realized that death might not be real, because there's just no way that I could have survived what I had done to myself. So I woke up and I went into a detox here in Brooklyn. And I heard the message of 12-step fellowship while I was in that detox. And this woman came in and she was sparkling, like I thought that maybe I was still tripping from all the drugs I had done. I was like, oh my God, I'm like all messed up. Like this woman looks like she's glowing. And she was she was speaking a message, of hope and freedom and transformation. And she was telling me that she didn't need to use drugs to get through her experience. And that just seemed like fiction to me. She might as well have been reading Harry Potter. Like it didn't make any sense to me how somebody could live life without using. But she was telling me that she was, and she had been for over 3 decades. And, so there was something about her. I didn't understand what she was saying, but I wanted to know more. And so I asked her where she would be the day that I was getting out of the detox. And I went to a 12-step meeting. And, like, if you're not familiar with what 12-step fellowship is, it's a set of spiritual principles that people who are, experiencing any kind of addiction, sort of like any manifestation of your shadow. It's these really simple principles that are set up by the universe, these 12 steps, and they guide you through the process of undoing and reprogramming. And, like inside these rooms, there is so much unconditional love. Like when I think about 12-step fellowship, I know that it's a gift from the collective to us. It's like, it's so simple, but it's for very complicated people. And I didn't understand how all of these people were telling me that they loved me and I wasn't doing anything for them. Like in my life, everything had been so transactional, even with my family. Like, I'll love you if you do this. I'll love you if you clean your room. I'll love you if you act this way, if you get this grade, if you do this thing. I had never really experienced unconditional love before, and I was getting it from a group of strangers. And it made me like recoil in my skin. Like I could not handle the way that it felt. And so I was secretly still using drugs. The idea is to be, like drug free when you're inside of these places, drug and alcohol free. And I just like I couldn't handle like all of the feeling that I was feeling. And so I was still sedating myself, but I was just lying and manipulating and deceiving people and saying that I was clean, and off of drugs, even though I wasn't. And I in 12-step fellowship, you celebrate milestones. Like once you get 30 days of sobriety and recovery, they give you like a little keychain. And so I made it to 30 days and I picked up this key tag, but I knew that I didn't deserve it. Like I was high when I picked it up. And so, like I went out to go celebrate because I felt like I deserved to celebrate this recovery milestone that I didn't actually deserve. And I went out with this man and he offered me drugs in a bar bathroom, and my addiction just kicked all the way back up again, and I went for like a deep dive back into my addiction. And I had been using drugs for over 20 years, and the last 2 years of my active addiction, my life evaporated. And it seemed like it happened all in one instant, but it was actually over 20 years in the making. But the last couple of years of my active addiction, I started using drugs that I swore I would never use again. I started smoking methamphetamine. And if you don't have any experience with that drug, I'm happy for you. It was invented in Nazi Germany and Hitler was on meth. So it'll give you a little scope of what that's like. It's genocidal. It is insanity. And it made me into such a shell of a human being. And so I was hanging out with a lot of colorful characters because I myself was a colorful character. And I ended up hanging out with this one man, and he had dosed me in a drink. Like I said, I had caused a lot of harm in my life. And so this person was mad that I had caused harm to him. And so for his payback, he decided to give me 300 hits of LSD inside of a beverage. And, like, I didn't know that had happened. I drank this drink and I thought that I had died, like it was like a complete dissolution of self. Like I was no longer me. I was at this review show. It was like a cabaret show. And there was this troupe of female clowns on stage. And like the stage was like, it was very dark lighting. And there was these curtains of red velvet behind them. And I swear to you, like it was a review of my life. Every act that came on stage, it was like a review of my life, and there was nothing to show for it. Like it was just like drugs and darkness and sadness, and there was like some toxic codependency being mirrored on stage, and I just thought like, oh my goodness, I died and I don't know how to get out of here. And I kept going up to people in this bar and I was like, what do I do? How do I get out of here? And the bartender like spilled a whole drink on me, and he didn't offer me a towel or a napkin to clean it up. And I thought, oh my goodness, this man is me. That's the kind of bartender that I am. Like I'm rude and crass, and I think that I'm sassy and fun, but like really I'm just harmful and mean. And I was seeing all of these reflections of myself. Again, I had no language for this. I just thought that I had died, and that was it. Like I was like, okay, I'm stuck in purgatory. I'm walking around in purgatory. And I spent probably the better part of a year like that, just thinking that I was dead, doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, to whomever I wanted. And the things that I wanted to do were use drugs, steal, lie, cheat, manipulate. Like I didn't have like there wasn't a lot of things that I wanted to do. I just wanted to continue to numb and medicate and sedate. And after that dosing, I was in an alternate universe for 10 days. It was 10 physical days. But in my mind, 3 months had gone by. So like the entire fabric of time had completely disintegrated in my life. And it was like this world where everything was washed in turquoise and blue. And there was all of these, like, it was so beautiful. I mean, if I had to put imagery to it now, I would say like it kind of looked like a scene out of Avatar, but it was just like this beautiful world. And like, again, I just thought that I was going through some sort of drug-induced psychosis. So, I just like wrote it off. And then anyway, so let me fast forward a little bit. So that was an overdose that was given to me by somebody else. This was like maliciously done to me, but it ended up being one of the most transformational things in my life. And I see that there was a reason for it and a plan behind it now. And yeah, like like I said, shell of a person, total shadow. I kept going through life like that. My life just kept slowly slipping away. And one day on March 23rd, 2019, March 23rd is the beginning of the season of Aries, which is the symbol of rebirth. These are all things that I put together after. I didn't realize them at the time. But on March 23rd, I had given myself an overdose of hallucinogens because that's the kind of life that I was living. I figured I might as well eat 8 grams of mushrooms to go do my laundry because might as well be wavy for some mundane human task. And so I went to go do my laundry. I got to the laundromat. I realized that I had taken too much and that my brain was starting to crack open a little bit. And I tried to record myself because I didn't know what was going on. And the recording starts at 3:33 p.m. that I tried to record myself what was happening with this awakening. So 3:33 p.m. on March 23rd, I began to have this very intense awakening. I found myself in the laundromat and I thought to myself, how do I know what laundry is? How do I know that clothes get dirty? What am I doing here? You know, like all of these sort of conscious thoughts, like, how do I know these things? Like, what is it inside of me that knows to do these automatic things? And the quarters felt like they were the size of my face. The paper money felt like tree bark. And I started to run home because I was like, I don't know what's going on. This is too intense for me. I lived about 6 blocks from the laundromat. And so I would, you know, like sort of quickly pace myself to the corner and I would see the street signs and it said Madison and Stuyvesant. I would get to the next corner and it would say Madison and Stuyvesant again. And the next corner, the same thing. And it was like I was stuck inside of this loop and I couldn't get out. And so then I really started to run home and I got into my house. And as I walked through the front door, I thought, oh, I am dead. This is like the Beetlejuice house. I can't remember how long it took me to get here. I don't know what I'm doing here. And I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. And as I saw my reflection, I had no idea who I was. And I had this very loud voice come into my awareness and it said, what are we doing inside of our daughter? And it felt like my mother's voice. And then I heard this masculine voice come into my awareness and it presented itself as a man that I had met a couple months earlier in like some drug-fueled bender for a couple of days. And then it sort of morphed into my father's voice. And I was reminded that we had committed suicide. And I threw myself on the bed and I was inconsolable. And the way that the download was coming through was that we had committed spiritual suicide. And I saw myself and this masculine energy transform into Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that when we ate from the tree of knowledge, that we had committed spiritual suicide, that while we were in the garden, we were nothing but spirit, we took in this information and we fell into human form. And so it correlated that with the suicide of my parents. My parents' physical suicide was correlated to my eternal parents' spiritual suicide. And that was the reason why I had that experience in my human life, was so that I could have this understanding that everything is connected. And as this download came through, I was like, whoa, wasn't there an easier way to learn this lesson? Like, couldn't you guys have given me a book? Did I actually have to experience like a double parental suicide? That seems like a lot. So my experience started to really take place after this initial download. And like I said, what I experienced was a Kundalini awakening. And if you don't know what Kundalini energy is, that's okay. Neither did I. Kundalini energy is described as life force energy. In the Western world, we would call it receiving the Holy Spirit. So it was a complete opening of all of my chakra systems. And I didn't know what a chakra was. Like, I'm coming from zero spiritual awareness and devout atheism. This is like where I was at this point in my life, you know, and just complete hedonism. Like I described to you what my life was like. There was definitely no room for spirituality or anything bigger in my life. So this is all language that I've gotten after. I just want to preface it with that. So all of my chakras began to open up and there was this rush of energy going up and down my body. And it was actually causing me to pee myself. So half of my awakening was spent on the toilet, trying not to pee all over myself. But I had this intense rush of energy going up and down me. And as my third eye and my crown opened up, it was like my soul blasted out of my body. And I found myself traveling through eternity. And my father's voice was one of the main voices that guided me through this space. And like I said, it was kind of every masculine voice that I had ever encountered in my life, every masculine energy I felt present itself to me. And so when I entered this space, the space of heaven, I'm going to describe to you what it looked like for me. Again, like I'm born in a certain generation, and there's certain lenses that this experience has been set through in my mind. So I perceived everything kind of like a video game. And I was shown that I was a spiritual soldier. So I was confronted with this group of entities. They didn't describe who they were, but they definitely felt like people in charge. It felt like I was standing in front of a table. And this is all in my mind's eye. No physical things were actually there, but it looked like a really like crappy card table, just like a cheap sort of like one of those plastic tables that you put up like in a dining hall. And there was, like a group of people sitting behind it. I don't like to use the word jury because it sounds very condemning, but it did feel like people who were in charge of something. I mean, there's no condemnation in eternity. Like there's nothing but grace and love. But so they were sort of thumbing through this book, and they said, hey, you're not done. Like you have to go back. And I was like, oh no, you must be looking in the wrong book, because I'm here and I'm definitely not going back. And they said, no, I still see all this stuff here. You still have a lot to do. And I said, yeah, I'm not interested in doing any of that. And they told me that I was a spiritual soldier, and the download was very loud and clear that I'm a soldier sent here to Earth to uplift the consciousness of the planet from a level of third dimensional thinking to fifth dimensional thinking. And then I sort of perceived like this, it sort of looked in my mind's eye like a spaceship that I was on. If you can remember the Gravitron ride from carnivals, it looked exactly like that. The Gravitron is like a ride where it looks like a spaceship and it spins really fast, and you throw yourself on the wall and like you can contort your body because there's no gravity inside of it. And it felt like my soul came out of the side of one of the walls, and I was in this craft with hundreds of thousands of other spirits, and I was being downloaded with our mission. And so, I see us all standing there, and I'm kind of like in two places at once. Like I see the scene of the ship and being told about the spiritual mission. And I'm also in front of this table of beings. And I'm like, well, look at all these people. Like, you don't need me as a soldier. You have all of these other souls. Like, I don't need to be there. I can just stay home now. And, like this feeling of reunion that it felt like inside of eternity, like the feeling of being home, of being understood, of feeling like so safe, secure, and protected. I have never felt that in my whole life on Earth. I had never felt safe. And I was finally in a space where I did. And they said, listen, the first half of your life was like boot camp. It was like really hardcore, push-ups in the mud, somebody screaming at you the whole time, rain in your face. The second half of your life is going to be carrying out the mission. You're going to have support. You're not going to feel alone. And it's not going to be anything like the first part. Trust us. And I was like, I do not trust you guys. You do not tell us what Earth is actually going to be like. Okay. It feels like a dumpster fire down there, and I'm not going back. And I transformed into this small child, and I was stomping my hands on the ground, and I was like pounding my feet and shaking my head and crying, and, just like absolute, I cannot, please. And so then they took me through my pre-birth planning. And again, I saw it like a video game. They showed me, I was basically inside of a grocery store. I had this empty grocery cart. There was a man guiding me. He was wearing a plaid blazer and a fedora. And he said, pick your life. And this is what I was doing before I came into form in this incarnation. And so I was like, I could see myself as a soul, like very excited. There's like this sort of like orb of light, like jumping up and down, like I'm going to Earth. I'm really going to go to Earth. And I start pulling all of these cereal boxes off of these grocery shelves. And I'm like, I want to experience addiction, molestation, sexual trauma, abuse, like all of these, like very adverse things. And then I saw myself put things into the cart that I hadn't experienced yet. Recovery, reprogramming, community, spiritual awareness, but I hadn't gotten to any of those things yet in my life. And so, like in the moment of being downloaded with this belief, with this pre-birth planning, I instantly shifted out of my victim mentality and I rose into my divinity as a co-creator of my experience. Things had no longer happened to me, they had happened for me, because on some soul level, I had chosen it for the evolvement of myself. And it was like 2 tons of garbage was just released from my being. You know, like I felt so free. And this is a belief that I hold very dear to myself, you know, because it's something that gives me just solace in what it is to be a human and to be on earth and to be here at this time, you know. And you know, but like it still wasn't enough to convince me like that I should, you know, go back to earth. And so, you know, I said, listen, I understand. I see that like I chose all of it. I get that I understand that I'm going to get through it and that it's going to be different, but I'm really just, I can't go back into her. And I could perceive my body outside of myself. And I said, listen, she needs way too much healing. There is no way to fix her. She's completely glitched. I can't do it. I can't go back into her. And so they told me, all right, you don't have to go back into her, but you definitely do have to go back because there's still lessons that you signed up to learn and you haven't completed them. You haven't even balanced this life. So I was shown the baby that I would be born into. And they showed me like this little, it again looked like a video game, like the 3D avatar that I would be born into, all of her stats. They showed me her gender, her ethnicity, where she would be born, her parents, her adversity, her purpose. And this baby had even deeper levels of adversity than I had already experienced in this life. And I thought, there's no way that I can start from zero. Okay, I give up. You guys win. I'll go back into her. And I found myself back in my body and my awareness, but it was like I had brand new eyes, you know, like I found myself waking up in my house. I had this very unkempt backyard. It was like completely overgrown. There was weeds everywhere. It was like disgusting. Like I never went back there. I lived there for 5 years. I never stepped foot in the backyard, but I saw it through the window with these new awakened eyes that I had from this experience. And I had never seen nature before as an awakened soul. And I just wept. I mean, like I fell to my knees and I cried looking at this weeded, overgrown backyard. You know, like I could see the energy running through the plants and the trees. And I had never seen colors look the way that they looked all of a sudden. And, you know, it was just so beautiful. And, you know, so like, okay, that was my beautiful experience in eternity. Thank you for letting me share my sacred art with you, you know, because I realized that being downloaded with a pre-birth plan, just sharing any of my experience with you, like this is my most sacred art. You know, the story of my life is my art as a soul. This is the story that I wrote for myself. And I love being able to share it. So, you know, like after this experience, I just wrote the holding off as drug-induced psychosis. Like I said, I had given myself an overdose of hallucinogens. Somebody else had given me a maliciously huge overdose of hallucinogens just a few months before. So my brain like really felt like very cracked and separated and fractured. This experience really seemed to meld all the pieces of my mind back together in a different way. But I had no way of understanding what was happening to me. I just wrote it off as drug-induced psychosis. I wrote it off. I thought, man, I got so high that I thought I was talking to God. That's crazy. You know, like I'll never be that messed up again. And I just went about my life. And, you know, like one of the downloads that was very clear in the space of eternity, there was 2 that were super crisp. One was obviously you have to go back to earth. The other was you have to let go of drugs and step into your mission. And I just didn't know how to do that, you know. And like I said, I didn't take it seriously. So I just kept using until the universe, source, energy, God, the divine, the creator, my angels, they stepped in and they said, listen, we told you that you have to get onto a different course. This wasn't a joke. And it was like they literally picked me up and shoved me on a whole nother highway of like, you know, the lane of life. So let me talk about some of the divine synchronicities that took place to get me onto a different path. You know, like I said, I just kept using. And all of a sudden, all of the drug dealers that I had been dealing with for over a decade, they all simultaneously decided to change their lives and stop selling drugs. People that did not know each other, so that I now had no way to get them. You know, I'm like calling up people to buy drugs and they're like, I found Jesus. I want to be a good father. I'm not going to do this anymore. And I'm like, what is happening? And everybody was doing this. And so now I had no way to get drugs. And so I was buying drugs from strangers, and the drugs just began to not work. And I found myself on day 3 of heroin withdrawal. And if you're not familiar with what opiate withdrawal is like, it's depicted in lots of movies. It's, it's really just physically disgusting. And day 3 is the worst. It's the day when like you're sick all over yourself. And, it felt like my bones were on fire inside my skin, and there was no way to cool the fire, and, hot and cold flashes, sweating, sick all over myself. And I had a thought as I was lying in bed, writhing in pain. And I said, damn, I couldn't even kill myself if I wanted to, because I'm so sick right now that I can't even get up out of this bed and figure out a way to kill myself. And right then I heard a voice, and it told me that I could request what I wanted fixed. And, like I was in the throes of desperation. So I was willing to believe anything. I said, okay, I can request what I wanted fixed. Great. And I was very over intellectual about it. I said that I wanted my pain receptors and my neurotransmitters fixed, that I wanted to no longer be physically dependent on heroin. I didn't say that I wanted to be rid of my drug addiction, because I still definitely wanted to do other drugs. I just didn't want to have a physical dependency to this one substance. And so they told me to lay back and to begin to count down. And as I closed my eyes, in my mind's eye, I saw these 2 little men. They were these little white men with bulbous noses. They were bald, and they were wearing lab coats, and they appeared in my mind's eye. And then poofed right in front of them, they were both holding lawnmowers, and they were kind of like shaking up and down, holding the lawnmower. And then I watched these 2 men go through every crevice of my mind, back and forth, back and forth. And I could feel these intense hot tingles as they were going through the crevices of my mind. And I knew that something must be taking place, because I could tangibly feel it. And then after they were done going through the windiness of my mind, I felt these X's go across my forehead. It felt like a thumb on my forehead, and then a palm on my forehead, and a plunger on the crown of my head. And as the plunger plunged down, and when it came back up, there was this huge white flash. And in that moment, I was instantaneously healed out of day 3 of heroin withdrawal. I mean, like seconds before, I was throwing up all over myself, just sick, sweating, desperate, dying. And then all of a sudden, I was completely well. I was like jumping up and down, screaming that the universe is real and that God loves me, and I can't believe this. And I could perceive all of these entities around me, and I perceived that they were like the other dimensional versions of myself. I saw all these different kinds of beings around me, like these beautiful, tall, iridescent, and then, just all these different sorts of entities, and they were all surrounding me. And I couldn't believe that this had happened. How could I get bestowed with the grace of a creator that I don't even believe in? Like, for the contrast of who I was when this healing happened, like when these experiences were happening to me, I was a devout militant atheist. I was a homeless meth head prostitute strung out on heroin. I was a racist. I was a rapist. I was a liar, a manipulator, a thief. I was all of the things that you would think wouldn't get you into heaven or bestowed with anything, and it was like none of it even mattered. When I entered the space of eternity, it was like my human life didn't even happen. It really felt like I was waking up from a dream. And I just thought like, whoa, that dream was nuts. That was crazy. And, so that contrast is so intense for me in my journey, and like those intense feelings of unworthiness, like, how could this be happening to me? I don't deserve this. I don't believe in this. Like, why is this happening to me? So, I just kept listening to my intuition. If I had a voice that told me that I could be healed and then I was healed, like, why shouldn't I continue to listen to the voice, But I had a very challenging time discerning between the voices in my head at first. My addiction, my shadow, my ego was still very loud and very present. And my divinity and benevolence was present, but it was so quiet, it was just these little whispers. And the ego was so loud and screaming, and I didn't know what to do. So I just started listening to my internal guidance, and, one of the voices in my head was like, you have to tell everyone that God exists and that God is cool, and go out there and tell the world. And so I went out on the New York City subway system, and I began like, proselytizing. And, it was so embarrassing. I was basically like on the subway train, and I was like, God is real. We're in a state of ascension. We're spiritual beings. We're only on earth for a little while. Don't eat McDonald's. It's poison. Please stay away from all pharmaceuticals. Like, these were like the voices in my head, and I was making such a fool of myself, and I just didn't care. I was so happy and free, and I couldn't believe that I wasn't sick anymore. And so then I found myself sitting on a train, and I had no destination. And I was just sitting there like really lost and confused and broken and battered, but there was like little glimmers of hope inside of me as well. And this man appeared across from me, and he was wearing a 12-step fellowship necklace. And I heard a voice in my head, and it said, "That's your path, follow him to a meeting." And that was on June 1st, 2019. And I've been clean and sober ever since. And, like I said, I had tried 12-step fellowship before. I knew what it felt like inside of those rooms. And when I went back this time, I knew that it was divinely guided. And so I went to a few more meetings over the next couple of days, and I found myself in a women's meeting the next day. And, when I came into this process, I did not look the way that I look now. In fact, you know what, I'm going to share some photos of what I looked like before and after with you, just so that you can kind of see the contrast. So this is me in active addiction on the left. I had gotten bit in the face by a pit bull because I was drunk and leaning over him. And this is me a couple of months ago on the right. And then this is another picture. This is right at the tail end of my active addiction. This is maybe about a month before the instantaneous healing from heroin withdrawal. So me on the left, this is, obviously very strung out on heroin and very sunken in and dead. And you can see there's no life in my eyes. And on the right is last September, I got to present at the IONS conference in Salt Lake City and share my experience there. So, just seeing the person that I was before, when I look back at who she was, it's really hard for me to believe that the universe would want to bestow her with any grace because of all the harm that she caused and who she was as a person, So I walked into this women's meeting, and like I said, that's the way that I looked. I looked real messed up, broken, battered, bruised. And this woman, she grabbed me and she held me so tight. And I mean, I hadn't been hugged or touched by anybody in so long in any sort of loving way. And she whispered in my ear and she said, "You are deserving of all of the love in the universe." And I believed her. She felt like maybe she was an angel, maybe she was one of these people that told me that I had to come back and she was going to guide me on my journey, and I had no reason to believe her, there was so much wreckage of my past that, I had no reason to believe that I was worthy of love, let alone unconditional love, the whole love of the universe. No way. And so I went to another meeting the next day, and it was a big meeting with probably about 60 or 70 people in there. And I swear to you, it was like every person that was sharing in the meeting was sharing directly to me. I mean, they weren't, but it really felt like they were, and it felt like it was a message from source to my ears just for me. And I was like, oh my God, am I creating the whole universe? Like, how are all of these messages just for me? Like, who am I, And I heard a voice, I had a thought that I didn't know how to be a person without drinking or using drugs. And I heard a voice told me to turn my head to the right. And I saw that sitting next to me, about 2 seats away from me, was the program director of a long-term treatment facility here in Brooklyn, a long-term women's facility. And I had a thought, I didn't know how to be a person. And now I find myself sitting right next to a woman whose life's purpose, passion, and profession is teaching women how to be women again after the use of drugs and alcohol. And I knew that it was another divine sign. This was my moment for me to really step into my new journey. And so, I was going to talk to her after the meeting, and I was going to beg her for a bed in her facility. And, the whole meeting, I'm psyching myself up. I'm like, you can do this. You got the whole universe behind you. Come on. You can do it. And I look over after the meeting is over, and she left. She was gone. She left early, and I felt totally defeated. But I had a plan. I was going to call the facility. I was going to beg them for help, and I was going to start my new life. And so I went onto the bus to go home. And as I stepped onto the bus, that woman was sitting right there. She left the meeting early and was somehow on the exact same bus as me, not at the bus stop in front of the meeting, because that's where I was. And I ran up to her totally manic. And I was like, oh my God, this is totally divine. I wanted to talk to you inside, but you're already gone. And now here you are. And oh my God, I think that you're an angel sent to earth for me. Can you please, 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 please help me? And she looked at me so calm. And she said, yeah, we can help you. We have a bed. Come by tomorrow. And she was saying a sentence that was about to change my whole life. And yeah, I went to that program the very next day with just the clothes on my back. I didn't take anything with me. I didn't have anything to take. I was about to be homeless. I hadn't paid my rent in 2 years because using drugs and drinking were just more important. So the marshal was going to come any day to change the locks on the house. And my most prized possession was like a $200 vibrator. I didn't have a lot going for me. So I figured if I could leave that behind, I could do anything. That was like the extent of my life. So I started my journey in recovery, and I went into this long-term program. It was a 9 to 12 month program, and none of my spiritual experience was integrated. I was still very all over the place, so many downloads. And when I stepped in and I did my intake, the clinical supervisor said, so tell me what's going on. And I said, yeah, I'm Eve, like from the story of Adam and Eve. That's me. I destroyed creation. I don't know what to do. I'm just trying to get back to heaven. And she was like, okay, so normal stuff, like she didn't. So, like that program gave me the opportunity to integrate my spiritual experience. There was nobody there really to help me do that. But I was away from my old life, like I was somewhere safe where I could heal and feel and transmute and become the person that I'm meant to be for the second half of my mission here. So, like I didn't have a cell phone or a computer for 17 months. I stayed there for 17 months, which is like, psychotic to stay somewhere for that long. But I really needed that space to become a new person, to figure out who I was and to heal all these other aspects of myself that had been ruling my life for my entire existence. And so everything that I learned from books. We were allowed to go to the library once a week. And I had this insatiable thirst for knowledge. I had never used my brain before. I mean, like the extent of my vocabulary before my spiritual experience was just like the drugs that I did, the amount of money that I charged for people to be with me. And that was it. I mean, like, I don't think I used my brain for anything else. And, like after the spiritual awakening and just sort of like the whole cracking open of myself, like all of these conscious thoughts, a much deeper vocabulary, eloquence with my words, like all came into my awareness. This is not the way that I spoke before, so I know that, transformation is real and it's definitely taken place in my life. So I read every sacred text. I read every book that I could get my hands on about the law of attraction and metaphysics and how to manifest my reality. That program gave me the opportunity to go to school, and I became a peer advocate. I have a job in the recovery field today, which is a wild sentence to say. I used to be a prostitute and I used to be a pimp. I used to manipulate women. I'd get them strung out on drugs and I would manipulate them to make money for myself and my own addiction. And today I have this amazing opportunity to make a universal amends, and I assist women on their healing journeys today. And it's more than I ever could have thought for myself. And thanks to the downloads that I've received and my spiritual beliefs and practicing the principles of a 12-step program, I can say that sentence to you and not fall apart. And, like that's all thanks to recovery and reprogramming, that I don't have to let my past be bondage, that I can understand what it was and the purpose of it, and I can move forward from there. And I know that I'm loved unconditionally, no matter what I've done in my past or what I might do in my future. So I left that program, and, while I was there, I had very strong connections to the non-physical. I would channel Archangel Michael. I practiced the art of bibliomancy, which is where you open up a book to a random page and it speaks to you. Not only would I open up a book to a random page and have it speak to me, but there would be a light box around exactly what I was supposed to read. And, like these spiritual gifts really scared me. And so I asked to have them toned down, and my request was received. And, like I kept having like these beautiful friendships and wonderful relationships with non-physical entities. And before I left treatment, I sent out a prayer and an intention. And I said, hey, it would be really great if you guys could manifest into physical people for me so that I don't feel so alone on this human journey. I need you guys to come into form so that I can continue to carry out the mission. And all of my communities manifested for me immediately. All I had to do was just set intention, and that was it. And so I found myself, after I left that rehab, I went into 12-step community, and I found a home group that I go to on a daily basis, and we read literature together, and we grow as individuals. And then I also set intention to find spiritual community. And so I found a group that study the Baha'i faith, and we have conscious conversations on Saturdays about the literature and just our experiences and how we interpret that. I study A Course in Miracles, which is a metaphysical text channeled by Jesus. I go to a study group for that as well on Mondays. And I belong to the IONS organization. I go to our sharing groups on Sundays and Thursdays we have on the IONS Groups and Events website. And I volunteer to facilitate and moderate those groups. And now I've moved into service as the coordinator of our webinars for IONS Groups and Events. And, just the transformation, finding community in my life, knowing that I'm not alone, and that, I shared with you guys, like a lot of loss and a lot of trauma from my human life, from my blood family, and the universe, source, my guides have set me up with my spiritual family. And I've found all the members of my soul family, and I continue to find them as long as I leave myself open to that. I never have to be alone ever again. My whole life before my experience was about isolation and degradation, and it was so lonely. Even when I was surrounded by people, I was so alone. And now I have the love of a loving, caring higher power in my life, so not only do I get to experience love and connection with other physical people, but I also get to experience it with source. And it's so amazing. And that's time to say that my life is always amazing. I mean, my best day using is nothing like my worst day in recovery. My life today is so much more. I mean, there's no way to compare it. Like you saw the pictures, there's just no way to compare who I was before versus who I am now. But I will say that for me, a big part of my integration process has been learning, expanding, and community. And like Chuck had shared when we started, the IONS organization has given me the opportunity to create a podcast. It's going to be on our YouTube, and it'll be on all streaming services. And I'm going to get to give space to people who have never shared their experiences before. And it doesn't have to be about near-death experiences. It's going to be about all mystical experiences, synchronicities, manifesting, after-death communication, just anything that puts us on this path. And I'm so grateful. I mean, I can't even believe the way that my life has transformed. So I know that if transformation is possible for me, it's literally possible for anybody. There are no words to describe to you what kind of depraved animal I was before my awakening, but it is not the person that is sitting here today. And, I have to keep that in mind when it comes to people that I don't particularly feel like I like. I have to remember, if I think that they're closed-minded or whatever my judgment against them is, they can transform too. If I can transform, of course they can. And, I feel very aligned in my purpose today. For me, I feel very pulled to create conscious community. I feel like that's a very big part of my purpose. Obviously, giving back and being of service, not only is it my career, but it's what I do in my free time as well. And, I love sharing my experience. It's such a beautiful testimony to how transformation and awakening is definitely going to happen to everybody. I mean, if it happened to me, it's going to happen to everybody. I truly feel that. But that's not always my purpose, is not always to try to find solutions or, tell people what works for me. Sometimes my purpose is just to sit and listen and just to be that empathetic ear that somebody needs, and just to hold space, and just finding that temperance, between living a human life and deeply knowing within myself that I'm a divine spirit just here for a little while, being open to, like what the universe sends my way, even when it's not working out the way that I think it should, like I know that it's got to be for a higher purpose. I've seen that already so much in my life. Anyway, that was a lot of talking. I'm so grateful to be able to, first of all, I'm so grateful to be able to be vulnerable and authentic today. Like I'm so grateful that as I design the most authentic version of myself, I know that her qualities are about being open, real, raw, and, like connecting. And so I'm so grateful that I was able to share this piece of myself with you guys today. Thank you.